So this is another Ajahn Chah talk. It's just simply called question and answer. There's a few questions from somebody, I don't know who that is, and then Ajahn Chah answers. So the first question is, there are those periods when our hearts or mind happen to be absorbed in things and become blemished or darkened, but we are still aware of ourselves, such as when some form of greed, hatred and delusion comes up. Although we know that these things are objectionable, we are unable to prevent them from arising. Could it be said that even as we are aware of them, this is providing the basis for increased clinging and attachment, and maybe is putting us further back to where we started?
Sorry, say that again? Could we say?
Could it be said that even as we are aware of them, this is providing the basis for increased clinging and attachment?
What is? Their awareness of it or the thing in itself?
Being aware of it.
That's providing basis for further clinging.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe it's putting us further back to where we started from.
Right.
But Ajahn Chah says...
Well, can you read again the question from the start? And let me say it first and then tell me what Ajahn Chah says.
So the question begins. There are those periods when our minds happen to be absorbed in things and become blemished or darkened, but we are still aware of ourselves, such as when some form of greed, hatred and delusion comes up. Although we know that these things are objectionable, we are unable to prevent them from arising.
Yeah, that's it. That's the wrong assumption there. Trying to prevent these things from arising, which means not seeing where your responsibility is, but overdoing it, trying to prevent things from manifesting in the first place. But that's not on you. That cannot be on you. So the response, and that's why they would get confused then, and end up revolving around the objectionable states, because they're overdoing the aspect of trying to get rid of it, and that's how you bind yourself with it. Like a dog that runs around the post trying to get away from the post.
It's tied to it.
It's tied to the post, tries to get away from the post, ends up being tighter and tighter closer to the post. So if that person were to recognize that they can't, it's not up to you to prevent things from manifesting or not. That's not your responsibility, and that's not the problem either. But usually people believe, oh, there is greed in my mind, I must get rid of it. But that's not the problem. The problem is you acting out of the greed, out of aversion. And that's on you. So you have to be able to not interfere with things that has manifested on its own, and then recognize that you're not responsible for that, and that's not the issue, and that's not the greed in itself. That's the prospect of greed being presented. But it's you then choosing to act by body, speech or mind, delighting it, with mental act, delighting in it, welcoming it. That's your doing. So when the Buddha says you shouldn't delight in greed, aversion, delusion, means that. You don't delight in what has presented itself. That doesn't mean I must get rid of what has presented, because that would mean that you are in control. That you do have a say as to what appears, what doesn't. But the fact that if you were to truly have a say, these things wouldn't have arisen in the first place. Yeah. But they do arise on their own, and you have no say, yet you go around acting like you have a say. Why? Because you don't know where the problem is. So you think the problem is in manifestation, and not in the attitude, your attitude towards the manifestation. So that's where the restraint comes first, not to prevent things from arising, but to enable you to allow things to arise without acting towards them, without acting out of it, out of that pressure of arising. And the more restrained you are, means the less interfering with things manifestation you would be doing. Anyway, carry on.
So anyway, Ajahn Chah answers that. He says, that's it, one must keep knowing them at that point. That's the method of practice.
Knowing them in the point of their arising.
Yeah. So then the questioner asks, I mean that simultaneously we are both aware of them and repelled by them, but lacking the ability to resist them. They just burst forth. So
they can't burst forth unless you choose to act out of them. That's what they don't see.
You push them forward.
Yeah. The pressure might be, yeah, sure. But no amount of the pressure can sort of make a choice for you. It's always you who chooses to act out of the pressure, which means you can also choose not to act, which means you are the doorway through which the pressure can enter, because you are the one who opens the door, or doesn't. Not knowing that, then yeah, it feels like as if the action came automatically out of the pressure, because you haven't practiced restraint sufficiently enough, properly enough. So you haven't discerned that line for which you're responsible, after which, like, you don't cross.
He gives a simile.
Go for it.
He says, "From then on there will just be arising and passing away in this place. Same as waves striking the seashore. When a wave comes in and finally reaches the shoreline, it just disintegrates and vanishes. A new wave comes and it happens again. The wave going no further than the limits of the shoreline. In the same way, nothing will be able to go beyond the limits established by one's own awareness."
That's it. Nothing can enter through that door, because you realize nothing could have ever entered. It's you who was going out through the door and being affected by things that are outside. So it was you who was stepping from the shore into the water that's being hit by the waves. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You start discerning where your responsibility is, and then you don't cross it. So you realize the mind can arise in all shapes and forms, whatever it wants, whichever way it wants. That's not the problem. That never was a problem. You welcoming it, entertaining it, trying to get rid of it, that's where the problem is. So you stop doing that, means that which used to be a basis for acts of greed still arises. But there is no greed, because greed comes from you, doesn't come from things. That which used to be basis for ill will still arises. But there is no ill will now in regard to it. So the waves still continue to come and go, but you don't get wet anymore, because you don't go outside where the waves are. You recognize. And people start going outside, or they carry on going outside, where you don't recognize where the safety from the wave is as well. So you think, I must prevent waves from coming, that's the only way to remain dry. But it isn't. You just have to see the range of the wave and allow it to basically express itself, so to speak. That's what I mean. You have to recognize things in their manifestation. They have manifested on its own. The wave has come on its own. So it's you who goes there and tries to push the sea back. That's what person's question implied. How do I like deal with this from arising, so it doesn't arise? Because for him, automatically coming of the waves means automatically me walking into the water and getting wet. He can't see the difference between the two things.
It means flood.
Means flood, means wet, means soaked, drenched. But if you were to recognize, no, the wave can come as like tsunami wave. It still can't cross this line unless I cross it that way. And that's what I mean. That's where sense restraint will enable you to start discerning that. Without sense restraint, wave means I'm in the water, either swimming with it or trying to go against it. So actually, the simile is quite accurate. The simile is quite good, because once you start discerning that, it's like finding that a single doorway through which things come in because you invite them in.
Or that island that no flood can overwhelm.
The island that no flood can overwhelm. Or as the Buddha gave the other one, the town that's surrounded by the wall and there is only one point of entry and exit. And you realize, well, if I want to keep track of what's going on inside, I don't need to chase people who come in and go after people that go out. I just need to stay at the doorway. The doorway of that mindful context. In regard to feeling, in regard to perceptions, in regard to intentions. Not a doorway of focusing on the tip of your nose where you're not aware of it. That's basically like you staring at the actual doorway and you don't see who walks through the doorway because you're staring at the woodwork of it. No, you want to see, okay, whoever comes in, I know that it's in, because there's no other way of going out. So whatever manifests itself, you know, it manifested to this extent. And there is lust in the mind in regard to it. Or there is non-lust in regard to it. Neither of those things are still a problem. The problem is when you start entertaining that lust and then welcoming it, welcoming the prospect of what that lust is pointing at, and that's how you start acting out of the desire. But if you don't act out of desire and ill will, those things cannot enter your mind. Even when you actually act, those things can't enter your mind. That's why freedom from those things is possible in the first place.
But choice is not mine. Choice is not mine.
Yeah, well, see, people, you can eventually work your way up, whereby you see the actual present choice as not being able to be owned by you. But until you work your way up in this gradual manner, all you're going to be doing is denying the choice after you made it. And that's a form of determinism. Like, you made the choice, but then you say, well, there's no self, so this choice couldn't have been mine. Well, it was yours when you were making it. How do you know that? It was rooted in greed, or aversion, or distraction and delusion. And whenever there is any of these three, there is the conceit, there is sense of I am, which means it is your choice. So the better way to go about it, not to kind of deny it in hindsight, but actually take it as a blanket rule, that the choice is always yours. So through that sense of responsibility for the slightest choice you make, you can then eventually overcome the ownership of the choice and responsibility with it, not remove the responsibility for the choice. So in order to remove the ownership of responsibility, you have to stop denying responsibility. And people deny responsibility when they say, well, choice is not mine, nothing is mine. Or people try to deny responsibility when they try to prevent things. There were bases for their choices, like the question implied. So as Ajahn Chah pointed out, you have to stop. Well, you have to stop engaging with things on that level, but start discerning where your doing is, and then stop doing it. And that's that safe shore you find, that it's inaccessible to these waves. So these waves remain right in front of you, coming your way at full force, but now you have confidence that they can't cross, because you know that they can't cross. Because you stayed with it long enough, and you saw that they can't cross. If you haven't stayed with it long enough, well, you still doubt whether they can cross or not. Which means you are affected by it. Like, you don't feel safe. If you doubt your safety, you can't say you're safe. Mm-hmm. So the only way to stop doubting your safety is to discern what that safety is in regard to these things that are assailing you. But the natural reaction is, I must prevent these things from assailing me in the first place. That's the true safety. It isn't.
I must destroy them.
I must destroy them. I must remove them.
Rather than get to safety.
Exactly. Rather than actually, hold on. I can't be fighting the sea and the waves and the elements. All I can do is find a place where those elements can't set their foot in. And that's when Nibbana is that negative. It's the unmanifested, unborn.
And also, you don't have to maintain it.
Of course, not. Impossible to maintain it. Impossible. Because maintenance is on the level of intention, choice. And this is safe in regard to...
Remember it.
No, you discern it in regard to the threat. Mm-hmm. That's why it requires no maintenance. Because any manifestation is a threat. Which means safety is in regard to any threat. Which means it's in regard to any manifestation. So it's the independent manifestation of thing, which is not your doing, that maintains your sense of safety, which is equally not your doing. That's why arahantship is effortless, once you develop it.
So you only need manifestation.
You only need to work initially to stop obscuring the true nature of manifestations. That it cannot be owned, because of that it's impermanent, that it's unsatisfactory, because it doesn't have that sense of pleasure connected with mastery over things, and because of that it cannot be yours. Hence it's not self.
But always, then that manifestation, discerning a thing, it reveals all the time that safe zone.
Yes, and that's the thing. Once you fully understood it, you don't have to keep discerning it.
Yeah.
The only, like an Arya Savaka needs to keep discerning it, because he still has residues of habits of ignorance and lust and so on. So he has to keep going against that grain until it's fully purified, and then there is nothing with the grain anymore. I'm just saying this so people don't develop note. You might, like Arahant is just constantly, this is a manifestation, this is a manifestation. No. Whatever you're aware of has been manifested. To that extent you're fully aware of it already. And to that extent you're fully free from it already. Because there was nothing to affect you in the first place.
That's the thing, well, an Aryan then would you're aware of that, it reveals the island.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
The island is revealed by the waves.
Yeah.
So all you need
The island is outlined by the sea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's why the unborn, like if the sea is born, Nibbana is the unborn, the unmanifested. So from whatever's manifested, Nibbana is outlined by being the opposite of that. Undefined, undesignated.
This is the extent of manifestation.
Undetermined. Yeah.
And by recognizing that, you can't unrecognize it or go.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't go back the other way and pretend you haven't recognized it.
You haven't recognized the extent of manifestation.
Yes. Yeah. Because that is the true nature of manifestations. They cannot be owned. They cannot be pleasurable. That's why you cannot be your own. That is the true nature. And that's why liberation from the ownership, this sense of self, and the dependence on pleasure is possible. Because you actually get to discern, and then these things become inconceivable. If those things were not truly beyond ownership, unpleasant, not your sense of self, they can be maintained in regard to it. If they were not truly like that, you wouldn't be able to free yourself from it. The sense of self would be the master and owner of the experience. But that means there wouldn't be any problems of suffering. But the fact that there is a problem of suffering means the sense of ownership is incompatible with that. That's why human existence is a discrepancy between how things actually are and how you're acting them to be. Which is why you're responsible for their being.
Discrepancy, dukkha.
Discrepancy. Any degree of discrepancy determines the degree of liability towards the dukkha. There's no discrepancy, no basis for dukkha. That's arahant. As in the scene, there's just the scene. A is just A. There's no discrepancy there. Now the people sometimes get a sense of it, but then they look for the discrepancy at the wrong place. They look at the discrepancy in the A, and they try to resolve A of discrepancy. The scene must be resolved of the lust and aversion, delusion, of the discrepancy of it. But no, lust and aversion, delusion is not in the scene. It's in your attitude towards it. That's why you remove that kind of attitude. You undo it. You extinguish it. And then what you have is in the scene, there's just the scene. In the herd, there's just the herd. Smell, taste, touch, same. Thought. But what person's question implied is, oh, there is a scene of greed, aversion, delusion. How do I prevent it from being seen? So he doesn't see that the issue was in his attitude towards the scene, not the scene. So his question of trying to deal with the scene, prevent it, make it unmanifest, imply the wrong view of him looking at the solution at the wrong place.